How would the United States fare versus China in a military conflict? In this video, we're going to break down the numbers between China and the United States and who would have advantages where. But first, we're going to respond to the insanity of the Chinese weather balloon. And while the government of the United States has now officially delayed Secretary of State Blinken's visit to Beijing, we are still seeing incredible passiveness from the Biden administration. Let's take a listen to what's going on. I really try my best to be in the middle, but I am pissed. I really do try my best. I try my best to be neutral. I try my best to provide rational information that makes sense and is logical and that both sides can appreciate perspective on. But I don't know what is going on here, but now we are getting reports, and this has been widely reported by Bloomberg, the Financial Times, the Wall Street Journal, the mainstream media, okay? It is pretty much confirmed that there is a Chinese spy balloon that has been found flying over America, specifically by potentially Montana and the area where America stores its Minuteman III intercontinental ballistic silos, okay? So ICBM silos are areas where we have our national defense weapons and our national attack weapons. So if we need to go blow up an aircraft carrier, we could send an ICBM at 2,500 miles an hour and do some work. If we need to counter somebody else's ICBM, we can send a counter missile, like a Patriot missile, at like 2 to 3 times as fast, at like 5,000 to 6,000 miles an hour, okay? And we launch these suckers from either Patriot missile batteries or silos, specifically in the purpose of an ICBM, right? Those come out of silos. And that's where they're stored and maintained out of the weather. So when we need them, they work. And guess what, folks? Our administration, like, first of all, it's worth noting, when crap flies, and trust me, I am learning this very quickly. When stuff flies in America, you are under the jurisdiction of the FAA. And the FAA don't mess around. The FAA, they're like the cops of the sky. And they will find the crap out of you if you screw with the FAA. The FAA, serious people, right? So here's China flying shit in our skies, and what does our administration do? Nothing. Instead, they say, well, it poses no physical or intelligence risk. We just want to leave it alone because it's traveling above the level of commercial air traffic, so it's not a collision risk either. And we don't want to shoot it down because, you know, we don't want it to like fall on anyone. And I'm thinking to myself, it's a balloon. You could wait for the appropriate location to take the darn thing out and let its debris fall. There's plenty of very empty areas around Montana. That's why we have silos over there. The real estate's cheap. Okay? So apparently, Beijing responded to this and said, look, the US is hyping this up. China has no intention of violating anyone's sovereignty. China's full of crap. They say that all the time. Oh, no, we don't have intentions of invading Taiwan. Don't mind all the missiles that we just launched to show our strength, hitting economic waters between Japan and Taiwan, and even incurring or in creating an incursion into the economic zones around these countries, right? Areas where, in other words, missile tests should not be conducted. China says it's apparently tracking a similar style of a balloon of some sort. Again, you can look at that here. It's seems to be some form of, if it's flying above commercial air traffic, it's got to be somewhere around 50,000 feet up. So this is almost on the edge of space. I think you get to the edge of space somewhere around 55 to 70,000 miles up into the sky. Commercial airliners tend to fly at about 35,000 feet. If you've got a private jet, you might be able to fly somewhere around 42 to 45,000 feet, which is kind of neat because you can fly above commercial air traffic. There's less traffic up there. It's kind of like having the HOV lane for jet travel. I don't know, little things you'll learn about over time. But anyway, apparently, the Biden administration is doing nothing. And so I immediately thought to myself, I'm like, what would Donald Trump do? And I don't even think we have to speculate much about what Donald Trump would do. And look, I even think Biden would do something, okay? I'm not trying to get political and suggest that, hey, look, we've got a Chinese balloon taking pictures of where all our weapons are in America, threatening our national sovereignty and defense capabilities. I'm not suggesting that Obama would sit around and do nothing. I think Obama would do something as well. Donald Trump has made it very clear on Truth Social, this balloon would be getting shot down ASAP. Because after all, the argument is that our government and administration right now is basically saying the quiet part out loud is being talked about on Truth Social. The Chinese Communist Party can send spy balloons over our nuclear silos and we will do nothing. I mean, I don't know about you, but it pisses me off. And I'm an in the middle kind of person. So I can only imagine how enraged people must be on other ends. And I get it. It's like, well, Secretary of State Blinken's about to visit Beijing. Good. He can bring the pieces of the balloon to Beijing and start the conversation off by going, hey, you guys left this in our airspace. Now, shall we have some soju and talk about trade and other things? I don't know. Soju's probably Japanese. Actually, soju's Japanese. Whatever they serve in China. I don't know what they serve in China. But the point is, look, China is we know this. They're the second largest economy in the world, but they are still a developing country, right? Now that doesn't give them any kind of excuse. Should absolutely give no one an excuse. But they're probably 20 years behind America militarily. They do have about 2.8 million soldiers, which is about twice as many soldiers as America has. But the size can actually potentially hurt them from developing a modern force, and that's because we have a more efficient force that are equipped substantially better than the Chinese troops. Think about this, for example. China spends roughly $12 billion a year on their military. So, and I'm saying this not to excuse the balloon should be shot down. I want to make that crystal clear. But I just want to give you some confidence that if this pisses you off, as it should, China's not close to us in terms of their military capabilities. China historically has been spending about $12 billion on their military. They actually want to increase their total defense spending to as high as $35 to $65 billion. Okay, that sounds like a lot of money, but we just spent nearly $100 million sending aid to Ukraine for military weapons and support. China spends about half of that in total defense spending. The United States spends about 10 times that on its own military. We spend close to $1 trillion a year with half the troop size on our military. So, you'd really have to ramp Chinese military spending probably by about 50 to 100% for the next 10 years for them to really have strong advantages. Now, China does have some strengths, okay? Don't get me wrong. They are an adversary. Probably the strongest strength that China has are their ballistic and cruise missiles. You can actually hit forward U.S. bases with Chinese cruise missiles in Japan. And they've got pretty dang good accuracy. You're talking about 5 to 10 meter accuracy. That's about 15 to 30 feet accuracy. It's pretty good. So if you wanted to target a house, you could level a house with a ballistic missile from hundreds of miles away or potentially thousands of miles away. Now, China also has a little bit of an advantage when it comes to what's called counter space. The U.S. has got about 5 times as many satellites as China, but China is a little bit better when it comes to testing, at least that's what we believe, testing anti-satellite capabilities. This is kind of like pointing jammers or lasers at satellites, basically breaking them. Sending certain frequencies to almost sort of like microwave satellites. I'm no like scientist when it comes to that kind of stuff, but China does have some strengths. Okay, so counter space, China's got some strengths. ICBMs in the localized area of the South China Sea, China's got some pretty good strengths. And apparently now they have spy balloons that fly around unimpeded in America. But let's be very clear. The United States military is far stronger than China. The United States military, for example, with aircrafts, is on F-22s and F-35s. These are 5th generation aircrafts, substantially better fighter jets than the old crap, which are like the 4th generation F-16s. Don't get me wrong. China's got about 50% of their fleet on 4th gen. The other 50, and that's decent, okay? That's decent. The other 50% is still like 2nd gen garbage from the 90s. You remember watching, maybe you saw Top Gun Maverick, and they get into like the old fighter jet, and they're like, oh gosh, I haven't flown one of these in for. It's kind of like that, except it's in real life. Now, China's got around 200 launchers for air defenses. So the U.S. would have to be pretty good with precision strike weapons to actually take these out in the event of a sort of a combat or war between China and America, as the United States is potentially defending Taiwan, for example. And so the U.S. their anti aircraft weaponry is pretty strong, but we've got the precision strike weaponry to take that sort of stuff down. Now, they are also pretty dang good at fighting potentially our naval fleet in terms of the fact that they do have submarines. They've got about 41 submarines. About 4 of those have nuclear capabilities and cruise missiles. But don't kid yourself. We've got countermeasures to that stuff as well. Our naval fleet is the strongest in the world. So the U.S. subs, it's just worth noting, are very strong. They're so strong that the Brookings Institute estimates that in just 7 days, if we wanted to, we could sink 40% of China's Navy. I'll say that again. In 7 days, the United States Navy could sink 40% of China's Navy. On cyber warfare, TBD, but the U.S. is probably stronger. China does have nukes, though. They're working on developing next-generation nukes, but we've still got about 13 times as many nukes for every nuke that they have. This doesn't necessarily mean like world-ending, blockbusting kind of nukes. It's more than blockbusting, but you know, big boys. They could be strategic, like localized nukes, but nobody really wants to go to that sort of world anyway. The point is just to know that the U.S. spends money like crazy on its military, and if you look at just their military spending, we outnumber them almost 10x. If you look at total spending, and by all means that you could suck together, maybe they spend as much as $250 billion a year, and they are trying to ramp this up on their military and their investments into personnel and new equipment and technology, but they're way behind. Way behind, old equipment. The U.S. has more tanks than they do. We've got 5x the military aircrafts we do. We've got substantially more modern vessels and ships than they do. We've got more nukes than they do. We've got way better missiles than they do. Again, we don't want to go into any kind of conflict with China, but let's just make it clear. I don't think the United States should be a little weenie baby and allow China to float their spy balloons over our intercontinental ballistic missile silo locations with impunity. Or like, oh, let's just ignore that because we're worried about some balloon material falling on the ground. I don't know. Me personally, as somebody who does their best to be in the middle, it just pisses me off. That's all I got.